Parent, and I am the CEO of Court Square Group, and I'd like to invite you to our issue of Driving the Business of Science podcast. Let me tell you a little bit about the companies that we're going to be talking today. We're actually going to have Sam Ali, the co-founder of Precision Evolution Global, speaking with us today about the series of shows that they run and things like that. But before we get going, let me give you a little bit of background on Court Square and RegDoc so you understand where we come from in this environment from a science perspective. So Court Square Group is a managed service firm. We've been managing IT infrastructure for life science companies for over 30 years. We've also got a system called RegDocs 365, which is a clinical and regulatory repository that we use. We have a number of modules from Life Science Launchpad to the eTMF as well as EDM for doing submission processing work. We're heavily involved in using AI against all the content within our content repositories, and we're looking to generate a whole list of point solutions from an AI perspective, particularly in the clinical and regulatory space. With that being said, now I'd like to introduce Sam. And Sam, if you could just give us some background on yourself before we start getting into the meat of the podcast.
Hey, good afternoon, Keith, and want to start off by thanking you and your team for joining this podcast. And pretty much, I'm one of the co-founders of Precision Evolution Global. We're based in Toronto, Canada, as well as here in West Palm Beach, Florida. We started the company back in 2019. Like other co-founder, Mr. Victor Sharif, and I had spent prior to this, in roles as consultants with pharma supply chain companies, with pharma CROs and other event planners. And what we found throughout our experience was, traditionally the way the conference went was that you set up a booth, attendees would come by, you pass out your business cards, and you would hope the conversation would extend past the event. What we found out is through our experience through multiple companies is that oftentimes the conversation would not go past the event. The attendees that we were meeting weren't often decision-making levels. And we thought, we put together event series that would primarily attract decision makers and also elevate those conversations beyond the scope of the venue hotel. And so we've been organizing these shows prior to COVID. During the pandemic, we were one of the first organizers to put on virtual shows as well, which was a huge achievement. And nowadays, we are organizing shows such as the Precision and Clinical Trial Summit series, the Precision and Drug Discovery series, the Precision and Med Device series, and also the Precision and Pharma Supply Chain series. So essentially, most of the aspects of R&D we organize. And again, very grateful to be on this podcast with you.
Fantastic. So actually, it's interesting because I was just with both Sam and Victor the last couple of days. We had a show in Boston. We had the Precision Clinical Trials show that was in Boston just recently at the Revere Hotel, which on our end was a great success. We made a lot of good meetings. We had a presentation that I did. I was on a panel. I moderated a panel. So I was able to have some good FaceTime there. It's interesting when I go to some of these different shows because we do a lot of different shows. Whether it's a DII based show where it's RSIDM or DIA Global that's going to come up in June, we're going to go to a lot of those shows. Tell me a little bit more. You talked a little bit about how you guys started and your background. Tell me a little bit more about the focus areas that you have. Like right now, this one is Precision Clinical Trials that I just went to. I'll have you elaborate on a couple of the other shows before because I've seen you at PCT. You had a PMD, which is medical device, and now you've got an oncology one going on. I'd like to hear a little bit about how you focus in on some of those areas and what drives you guys and how you can then deal with who the speakers are going to be and how you're going to go after participants.
Absolutely. Great question. So oftentimes, everyone here has used medication one way or the other, or has family members on medication. What's the story behind that medication? Oftentimes it's clinical research and clinical trials. So we thought we put together this series that really shows, how the medicine's being made, the approval process, the ups and downs in clinical trials. And this series itself highlights concerns, opportunities, and challenges for the industry, pharma biotech industry, as well as vendors, solution providers, and CROs. And it's a great forum where both buyers and sellers come together They address what's going on, especially these days. Everyone's talking about clinical research, the future of clinical research, and pretty much this clinical trial series is happening in Boston, in Europe, as well as out West Coast in San Diego, bringing all these upcoming companies who are looking to either enter clinical research or move to phase 2, phase 3 research and beyond that, and pretty much introducing them with qualified vendors like yourself to streamline that. We all know that on average, it takes over 10 years for the R&D drug development process to take place, sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. There's ups and downs. Navigating throughout the FDA process itself is quite a challenge. And so our Precision and Clinical Trial Summit series really emphasizes that, bond between the vendors and the actual sponsors.
How do you determine what the mix of presentations are going to be? And it would be important maybe just to tell people about what you guys do and what the agendas are like over a couple days and how you set things up. Because I think people that haven't gone to these may want to start going to some of them, because I think it's important for them to look out and talk to other people in the industry. I've been a huge advocate of people in the industry talking with their peers and understanding how things go. Some people right now, there's a lot of layoffs in the industry, and they it's a great way to learn, who's hiring, who's doing what, how you can get a hold of other people. So I think it's a great thing. But tell me a little bit more about just the shows in general and what your focus would be.
Really great question. The traditional event model would have a lot of lineups of speakers, track A, B, C, just fill the hall with different types of speakers. At our programs, we're focused more on the quality over the quantity of speakers. So typically each event has around 20 high-level speakers. We prioritize senior decision makers and frontline innovators who are deeply involved in implementation, not just strategy. It's easy to talk about strategy up on the stage, but we're really trying to bring in speakers who are implementing that and showing real life case studies, so our audience ultimately benefits from those presentations. So a lot of the job titles that we bring to our Precision and Clinical Trial Summits are, VP ClinOps, Chief Medical Officers, founders and CEOs, just like yourself, Keith, who are really making an impact in terms of drug development. So again, the old model was, hey, we're going to fill up our lineup of speakers of XYZ company. We'll have track A, B, C, D going concurrently. We typically only have one track at our program, which is centered on innovation, challenges, and pretty much changes in the industry.
So from a perspective of the business of science, one of the things that I like people to realize is that, when everybody thinks about drug development, they think about, somebody in a lab coat in the back room in a lab doing all this other stuff. But there's so much that goes into it. And over the years, I've learned, there's so many silos in big pharma. When you start with some of these smaller companies, everybody does everything. And then as they grow, they start to silo into different areas and do that stuff. Your focus right now for this particular show that we just did was clinical trials and the ClinOps people. You mentioned another show you did with logistics. Tell me a little bit about that and how you guys decided that you were going to do a logistics show.
Yes. So it's one thing to have the drug in your pipeline. It's another thing to transport, store the drug, making sure patients actually receive it. So that was sort of the backbone, the idea behind the Precision and Pharma Supply Chain and Logistics Summit series. Again, we're doing that in the East Coast, in Boston, in Europe, as well as out in the West Coast in San Diego. And so the idea behind that program was, these pharma companies, yeah, we have their VP ClinOps and their chief medical officer speaking at our clinical trial shows. But at this specific pharma supply show, now we're having their VP procurement, their director supply chain, their director CMC now involved speaking about the process, the challenges in the supply chain system. Of course, 2020 was one of those years where the world stood still with the COVID pandemic. And, we saw how supply chains were disrupted, not just in the US, but globally, all around the world, China, Japan, India, Europe, South America, etc. And so the idea that me and my co-founder came up with was, number one, how's the supply chain system changed after COVID? Number two, How are patients receiving their drugs now? With the advent of decentralized clinical research, a lot of patients are expecting care at home or other facilities compared to a traditional site model that we have. And number three, the advent of AI and machine learning and how that's impacting supply chain systems.
Well, it's interesting because when you deal about clinical supply chain, I've had the benefit of just recently we picked up a new client, Frontier Scientific Solutions, recently down in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we've been doing a ton of work with them. And I've learned a lot over, I've been doing this for 30 years in this industry, and I knew about clinical supply chain and I knew about, the supply issues that are out there. I never really understood how much product was lost during the clinical supply chain. People don't understand that, as we're going a shift from small molecule to large molecule, meaning the basic pharma work to the biotechs and the cell therapy type work, that whole concept of the new COVID vaccines and different vaccines, they all have to be at a different certain temperature, right? You got the cold chain issues you got to deal with and things like that. People don't realize that when things get transferred from a plane and they sit on a tarmac for a while, if it gets below a certain temperature or above a certain temperature, all of a sudden the efficacy of that drug, or if it's cell therapy and if it's your cells and they're being shipped from here to India to be worked on. We've got a CDMO client that's actually doing, they work with hospitals here in the US, but then they ship things to India and ship things back. When you're dealing with those kind of issues, the problem is you don't have an extra chance. You got to deal with that. If those cells die because they get too hot, then all of a sudden you're going to have to go back to that patient. Nobody wants to do that. So there's so many important issues that are around that, and the concept of active ingredients that go into drugs and things like that need to be shipped in from Europe. We're worried about all the tariffs and things like that now, and you hear everybody's kind of worried about everything that's going on. And in the last couple of years, the biggest thing has been the GLP-1 craze and the whole issue around weight loss and transferring, products from Europe over here to the US, particularly companies like Lilly and Novo Nordisk and companies like that have all these new products that are coming out in the space. So I think it's timely that you guys are actually doing that. And I know there's some other ones that are starting to look at that space too. And I think that what people don't also realize is that there's a big difference between commercial product, the stuff that you're dealing with, large pallets of drugs coming in from one place to another, as well as the individual clinical trial supplies, because trials are made for lots of sites and you have the last mile, getting it from when it gets transported in to where it goes out there. So I'm looking forward to seeing, I may have to attend one of your logistics sessions just to learn some more about that. So that's fantastic. Tell me some more about how you and Victor got together and what you wanted to do, and has it been a rough road getting to this point, or do you feel you're hitting your stride now? Tell me a little bit about the business in general.
Absolutely. So I've been around the industry since 2015, Victor a little longer, since 2013, 2012. We were consultants with a pharma supply chain service provider who provides, transportation, storage in the Toronto area. We worked with other event planners on a consultancy basis as well, and saw firsthand how the interactions went between pharma, biotech, med device companies and vendors and solution providers. We saw great things, but at the same time, we saw pitfalls as well. We saw solution providers getting ghosted. We saw solution providers, aimlessly handing out business cards. And me and Victor got together one day in 2017, and we were like, hey, man, there's a lot of opportunity here, especially in the healthcare life science sector. You have a growing industry, you have lots of potential, you have big pharma out there, but at the same time, you have small, mid-sized companies who are continuously receiving funding. How do we bring everyone together? How do we connect them? So we thought of this partnering platform, which is available to everyone 1 month out prior to our program. It gives you an in-depth view of each attendee's profile. So going beyond, the traditional company bio, personal bio, this actually gives you an actual snapshot. So if you're participating at our Precision and Clinical Trial Summit series, you'll see the company's pipeline, their therapeutic focus, exactly what sort of challenges that decision maker is facing. So you get a real life snapshot. And that platform itself really helps drive the return on investment for a lot of our exhibitors. Because again, the traditional model would be, hey, you sign up for an event, you get the attendee list prior to the program. Now it's up to you and your sales marketing team to reach out to those attendees, schedule meetings, hope that they drop by your booth, and then hope that they follow up or respond to your follow up after the program. So yeah, we started this company with this goal of connecting both sides. And of course, the pandemic had to hit 1 year after we founded the company. Everything went virtual for the first 2 years. And again, we were one of the first companies to organize virtual trade shows, which was successful, organizing the one-to-one meetings via Zoom. And yeah, since 2020, end of 2022, we've been back at in-person summits at beautiful five-star venues. And it's been great. There's a lot of potential in this industry. There's a term out there called Moore's Law, which is, which you're probably aware of, is how technology is doubling, or microchips are doubling every 2 years. And so the impact of technology in this healthcare life science industry, I believe, is still at its infancy stage. I don't believe we've matured yet. I think we're going to hit the maturity with AI, machine learning in the next 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So there's still tremendous opportunities, and especially what your company is doing at Court Square Group. I've seen your technology evolve the past 5 years and how you're adapting to the industry. So yeah.
Yeah, we have to stay up to, as a vendor to this industry, we look to see where the ball's going, tomorrow so that we can stay ahead of it. So I think that's important. So, we do have a bunch of AI-based tools that we're working on. I take a different tack than maybe some companies do. When we go after that, but I like to see the addition of that to all the different shows that I go to. We see a lot more people talking about that. And I think it's starting to get past that proof of concept stage and into more of the, hey, let's get some actionable projects going that actually make a difference. Tell me a little bit about, you talked about East Coast, West Coast. So a lot of people do things in Boston, the Philly area. Most companies will do something East Coast, West Coast. Tell me a little bit about your decision as to where you want to go. And do you look to focus in on those areas because you're trying to get the hubs of people in those areas to come to the shows? How do you reach out to your actual attendees when you're doing that?
Absolutely. So the first thing when it comes to event planning is finding the right venue. You have to pick the right city, which has the right biopharma cluster. We all know Boston as the #1 place in the world. You have MIT, Harvard, all these great academic institutions there. But on the West Coast side, you have San Francisco, especially South San Francisco. You have San Diego. The past 2 years, we've been doing our shows in San Diego, which is a growing life science hub in the US. You have great institutions like Scripps Research, UCSD, the University of California, San Diego campus. Aside from that, you have a lot of venture capitalists who are based in the San Diego area. Out in Europe, we typically change the venue every year. Some years we're in Frankfurt in Germany, other years we're in Amsterdam. This year we're doing it in Zurich. Again, I guess what Europe really benefits is that since the geography of Europe is smaller than the US, you can take a 1 hour plane ride from France and be in Switzerland. Going from Boston to California is like 5, 6 hours if we're lucky. So definitely choosing the right cluster is important.
Excellent. How has it been? You seem to be doing pretty well over these last few years. Have you seen an uptick since COVID, since you've gotten out of the virtual stage? Tell me a little bit more. Are you going to add any more? Have you thought about other types of areas within the life science world that you're going to be thinking about in the future? Give us a little look behind the curtain there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say since 2022, traffic has been picking up tremendously. We just thrown, as you recall, this week we had our Boston Precision Clinical Trial Summit, and I would say it was probably the most well-attended show that we've put in the history of our trade shows. Even day two, traditionally day two always has less amount of audience, but even day two, the halls were jam-packed. There was attendees visiting booths. There were one-to-one meetings that were still happening. And credit goes to my team as well. We have a great team. behind the scenes, who's making sure that the attendees are set for the program. The follow-up systems are set in place. Attendees are, if they're coming from out of state, do they have accommodation? Do they have plane tickets ready? I feel like a lot of event planners, they'll book the attendees, but then there's no follow-up process prior to the program. So if you're throwing an event in Boston and you have an attendee coming from, let's say, DC, you want to make sure that attendee have accommodation in Boston. How are they getting to Boston? Is it via train? Is it via plane? Have they purchased those tickets, et cetera, et cetera? And to add to the other part of your question is in terms of expanding beyond these life science summits, we are thinking of doing a potential show. We already have an oncology related show, but we're thinking of also doing one in neuroscience, where there's a lot of tremendous opportunities with those therapeutic type companies as well.
Excellent. Yeah, one other area you may want to start to look at, because we've been involved in it in a number, and I've seen a number of different shows now. Cell and gene therapy is starting to pick up a lot, and there's a whole bunch of areas around that that may be worth taking a look at. It may be too kind of crazy out there right now for it, but at some point, I think that personalized medicine and those kind of areas are going to be a major issue for it. Shout out to you guys, because I want to thank you guys for helping me. We had coordinated a dinner on the first night of the show this week, and we had 10 people at our dinner. We had some customers, we had some potential partners, we had some people that were on panels with me. So it was a great dinner, and I think those are the kind of events where people get to network at this, and I think you can't downplay the networking aspect of this as much as anything. I can tell you that of the shows that I go to, people that see me at more than one show or hear me speak at more than one show, I think it's great, because they may not need what we do right now, but 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, when they're in a clinical trial or starting a new trial, they're going to remember what we did and what happened there, and all of a sudden, boom, it just works out. So I would encourage anybody in that's a vendor to this space, working with companies, start to look at these shows as a great way to get your word out, to get people to see who you are, and stick with it, because I think part of the issue is really going to be, sometimes you start with one, you say, well, I don't know if that was really that great for me. I didn't really get much out of it. But then all of a sudden you're there more than once, and all of a sudden, boom, all of a sudden people remember you and they come back to you and they talk to you. So I think it's important to not kind of walk away from these things and deal with those kind of things. So I want to thank you guys, you and Victor both, for what you guys do and how you do that. As we're getting to a close on this particular segment, I'd love, Sam, some parting thoughts from you as to what you think, about this whole part of the industry, and what you would like people to take away from this podcast.
Absolutely. The future of event management is changing with the times as we progress from 2025 to 2026. How you select which type of events your company's involved in really matters. Marketing budget is limited, especially with the state of the economy and the world. You really got to pick the right event where it drives value and the return on investment. And you mentioned a great point earlier. I like to tell my potential attendees that when you come to an event, you're seed planting. You plant your seeds, you have a conversation, and then you meet that person again at a different event, or through a webinar or podcast, or through email or on LinkedIn, and the seed begins to grow and grow. So by attending our events, you plant a lot of seeds. Our job as a facilitator is making sure you plant the right seed at the right time. And again, we're very excited. We have the next couple events coming up in Europe, as well as we'll be in San Diego in October, and in Boston for our oncology meeting in November. And we're very excited to meet you and the team again.
Excellent. All right, everyone. I want to thank you again for listening in on this podcast. This has been the Business of Science. And Sam, thank you again very much for today and coming out. And everybody, we'll see you at the next one. Have a great day, everybody.